If you're hateful to queer people, I identify as a problem. Your motherfucking problem. And my pronouns are fuckaround/find out. Hello, Champagne Nightmares. Welcome back to my channel. Or if this is your first time, thanks for stopping by. I hope you'll stick around. I am Miss J, your trash queen of glam, geek, and gore. And for today, we have another great horror video. I love when I get to sit down and watch some really fun horror movies, especially horror movies that have a little bit of social commentary, a little bit of maybe wokeness to them, if you will. I love it. I love things that have a little bit of social commentary. I'm here for it. And we are going to talk about They/Them, which is a Peacock exclusive, streaming now on Peacock. Hashtag not sponsored. And if we're honest, I signed up so I could watch Days of Our Lives. But I am super excited to tell you all about this new queer slasher film, what I think it does well, where I think it maybe suffers a little bit, and we are going to break it down and figure out, does this belong in the same sort of social commentary horror category as Get Out and Black Christmas 2019, but for the queer folks? So if you're interested in talking about They/Them, then stick around. We're getting into it right now. Alright, so for this video, we are going to talk about They/Them, streaming on Peacock, written and directed by John Logan. Now, this is a new movie, so I'm going to give you the, spoiler warning. All of my horror videos are super spoilerific. This one, I don't spoil everything. I tried to keep some things secret, but we do definitely talk through the whole thing, and we talk through the resolution. So if you haven't seen it and you want to see it before you see this video, then definitely go check it out and then come back here. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to break it down. We're going to see what I think. And I'm super excited for this one because I think that, very similar to Black Christmas, I think that this movie really tries to give queer people a horror that centers them. Not just putting queer people into horror, and not just having queer characters who then get murdered right away. It is actually a story with a very queer perspective. So I was very excited about that. Now, in terms of this, I will say that it is somewhat like Black Christmas 2019, where if you just separate any of the social commentary piece, it is probably, just as a horror film, as a slasher film, it's like a CC+. It's not bad, it's not terrible, but it's definitely not as successful. I think even Black Christmas is a little better than this one in terms of just the, actual horror part of it. But this one is a little bit toned down, but it has some really interesting, great social commentary. And it really does center queer people. If somebody is straight and cisgender and they watch it and they don't get it, I mean, that's kind of okay. That's kind of the point, is that if you enjoy it, you enjoy it. But if not, this isn't made for you. Not everything has to be made for you. It's not all about you, sweetie. So we open with this woman who's driving on a dark road through this forested area. We don't know who she is, but there's this creepy voiceover talking about everything was okay, and then she wandered into the woods and it was dark and there was this fetid smell and blah, and it starts to get creepy. And then as it zooms down in on her, you find out she's listening to a true crime podcast. But we don't know who this woman is. All of a sudden her tire goes flat, and she pulls over and she realizes that her tires are flat, and she looks back in the road and there's a spike strip. So this is on purpose. So she starts to kind of breathe heavy, and she runs to her car, and eventually we see this character emerge out of the woods who's wearing a mask. So very typical slasher killer, has a mask, but this one looks like two faces kind of stuck together, and it's like there's big staples kind of holding it together. That's going to be important later. But it's just kind of this generic mask that doesn't let you know who it is, and a big trench coat to kind of cover up who the person is. And she's dead right away. So she's dead. We don't know who she is, but she's kind of that opening kill. A lot of slasher films do this. They have that opening kill to kind of set the stage and maybe tease the killer a little bit. And then we're going to go to Camp Whistler. So as we pull up from her car, the aerial shot goes and shows that there's a camp, And the next shot is in the camp. So it starts with a dark screen and then these doors open. And we're inside a cabin. And we're actually following 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon himself. He plays Owen, the owner of the camp. And he's kind of walking out to them. Now, this is a gay conversion camp. It's called Camp Whistler. And all of the kids that have come in and filed off the bus are these collection of really fun queer kids. Some of them are a little bit more gender normative than others. There's some kind of dyed hair, and there's some fun accessories like you would expect from like Gen Z queer kids. There's a whole mix of people. Very diverse, very woke, the whole thing. So he walks out, and the first thing he says is, "I can't make you straight." And that's kind of his demeanor at the beginning, is he's very smiley. He's really trying to put them at ease. And this is going to feed into how this whole movie progresses. So first, he starts with, "I can't make you straight. I don't want to make you straight. If you're comfortable with who you are, then just come, enjoy, work on your tan, blah, blah, blah. But I get the feeling that some of you are maybe a little bit uncomfortable with who you are." And so he's starting to kind of place this doubt. This sort of thing really makes sense for conversion therapy, because I think that some people expect that conversion therapy is going to be that you're going to take queer kids, drop them off, and they'll put them in cages and call them fags and just like be terrible to them. No, of course not. They're going to try to win you over. They're going to try to seduce you into this program. So he's trying to be as nice and as sweet. He's like, gay is okay, blah, blah, blah. But I bet that there are some of you who might be uncomfortable. Because what that's doing is it's shifting it onto the victim. Because why are some of these kids maybe uncomfortable sometimes? They're not uncomfortable because they really don't love themselves. And maybe some of it is internalized homophobia or transphobia, and maybe they have trouble loving themselves. But they have trouble because the outside world is nasty to them. That's not their fault for being uncomfortable. I'm getting ahead of myself. This movie makes me rage in some places. But he's very smiley, and he says, God doesn't hate gay people, and that's the last time we're going to talk about the man upstairs. There's going to be no Bible thumping. We just want you to like find a gender normative presentation that works for you. And that's very key to that initial message, is he wants a gender normative presentation. You're going to see a lot of stuff that has to do with like the traditional roles of men and women, masculinity and femininity. So he's talking to them and trying to set them at ease, and then he introduces the staff. So there's his wife, Cora, who is played by Carrie Preston, who I love. She was in like one episode of Sex and the City, maybe 2, where she married Miranda's friend, and she was like her decorator. And I love her, and she's a stone cold bitch in this movie. So I love it. I'm here for it. But Cora, his wife, and then there is the activities counselor and the athletics counselor are Sarah and Zane, who are former students of the program, and they are now engaged. 2 guesses how that's going to work out. And then we have Nurse Molly, who's there to help them if anybody gets injured. And then at the end, they just kind of throw in, oh, and that's Balthazar. And so, of course, there's the stereotypical, like, creepy pervo handyman that's not even there to greet the kids. He's just, like, loading up a wheelbarrow. And they're like, that's Balthazar. And he's like, and then, like, goes off. It's so ridiculous. And the name Balthazar, I don't know what he's doing. He's fixing cabins. He's doing magic. It's very strange. So then he tells him to go unpack, and he's like, girls' cabin is over there, boys' cabin is over there, and everybody starts shifting, and in the middle, there's one camper that just stands there, and that's Jordan. Jordan is our main character, and so they all kind of go, and then people realize, something's happening. So all the kids turn around, and Kevin Bacon turns around, and he's like, there must be some sort of problem. And Jordan is like, I'm trans and non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. As in, they can't believe they're at this fucking camp. And so Kevin Bacon, Owen, I should call him Owen. I know it's Kevin Bacon, but Kevin Bacon is much nicer than this person in the movie. It's acting. Who knew? And so Owen is like, is there a problem? What's going on? I sense this is going to be an issue. And so they tell them, I'm trans, non-binary. I use they, them. And so Owen says, we don't have an all-gender cabin. Why don't you go over to the boys' cabin? And if you don't feel comfortable there, we'll talk about what kind of solution that we have. So again, this is meant to put you at ease because we're supposed to understand Jordan as being assigned female at birth, and they are trans and non-binary. They use they, them pronouns. But we're supposed to understand that this is somebody who is assigned female and is now presenting in a more masculine sort of way. So it looks like Owen is being understanding and says, go over, join the boys. If you don't feel comfortable, then we'll figure something out. So everybody goes and they unpack and they get settled. And then what happens? So then we have the group therapy session where they get everybody together in the lodge and they start asking them, why are you here? And there's a real mix of people, and we meet all of our main characters. There's a couple of other people in this camp who, I get that they can't all be main characters, but they don't even get to speak. These other people literally don't get a line in the entire movie. So there's like some just like filler. But then we get to meet the other 6 main people that we have. So Toby is kind of this flamey theater queen. He's there because he made a deal with his parents that if he spent the week at this camp, they would get him seats to see Moulin Rouge in New York. We love a theater queen. And then there's Alexandra, who is very clear. She says, I have no interest in not being queer. I am just here because I made a deal with my parents. They forced me to go. And so I'm here. I don't care. I don't want to be here. I don't believe in this. So they're the ones who are really kind of against this whole thing. And then we meet some of the others. So we meet Stu. He's kind of the frat boy. He's a swimmer. He's an athlete. And then there's Kim, who's like the pretty blonde Barbie girl. And they both give some version of, I just want to be normal. I just want to be loved. My father expects these things. My parents expect these things. And so they just want to be normal. They just want to fit in. And then we have Veronica. And Veronica is like the stereotypical angry lesbian, but she identifies as bisexual. And so she just says, she's so mad, but she's like, I just want to be fixed. I don't want to be like this. But she's very mad about it. And then Gabriel, who's one of the boys, who is very androgynous and has this long flowing hair and very beautiful lips and just this elegant bone structure. And he talks about not fitting in and hearing people calling him fag and all of these sorts of things, and wants to be changed. So we're getting a whole range, and Jordan is the last one to go. And Jordan, this is where Jordan establishes that they are a minor. And most of these kids, it's not clear if they're college, if they're high school, but their parents are sending them, so they're probably under 18. Jordan finally speaks and says, I made a deal with my parents. They're very religious, they're very strict, and they said that if I come here for a week, they will let me emancipate myself. So that's how we know that Jordan's a minor, because they want to be emancipated from their parents, and the parents said, as long as you go to this camp and try it out, we will agree to that. So right away in that group, we get this mixture, and we start to see that there are those who are less normative and less interested in being normative. Veronica and Jordan and Toby and Alexandra are not with the program at all. They're just like, fuck this noise. And then we have Stu and Kim and Gabriel, who are trying to be a little bit more fit in. Veronica is kind of straddling that because she says that she wants to be fixed or whatever. But you see, we get a range of opinions about this, and we get a range of sensitivity about queer and trans identities. So Stu, right away in group, misgenders Jordan and uses he instead of they. So this is a whole thing. There's always somebody, anytime that somebody misgenders Jordan, there's somebody there, usually Toby or Alexandra, who is there to correct them and say, it's they. So they have this group, and Owen is like, go relax, go be yourselves, and we'll get started with therapy and everything in the morning. So the next morning, Alexandra wakes up super early, and she like sneaks out of the cabin, and she goes to take a shower. And then we get this like typical slasher movie POV of somebody sneaking up to the showers. And is it our killer? No, it's Sarah, the activities director, who is a former lesbian. And she catches Alexandra in the shower, and that's where we learn that Alexandra is actually trans. And so Owen makes a big deal of it, and this is where we start to see the facade with Owen crack. So all that smiley, gay is okay, all this kind of stuff, he brings Alexandra over to the boys' cabin and storms in and like tells her she's got to find a bunk here. And he says, all I ask from you people is that you treat me with honesty. Jordan did that. He was upfront about his transition. You didn't do that. So I want everybody to meet Alexander. And like was dead names her and uses the wrong pronouns and says, we're going to have roll call in 10 minutes, dress appropriately. So Alexandria is on a bunk and she's like, I don't have boy clothes. Like, that's not who I am. And so Jordan jumps in and says, does anybody have any extra clothes you can spare? We'll find you something appropriate that you're still comfortable in. And this is where Jordan also kind of makes their first statement about how they feel about this camp and how they feel about Owen. Because when they go to roll, Alexandra is now in like a tied-off Daisy Duke kind of shirt and little shorts that are rolled up. And Jordan has come in a dress. Because this is again signaling that Jordan was assigned female at birth, and they are trying to goad Owen into saying something about, what do you mean by appropriate clothing? Why are you okay with my transition and not her transition? So if you say appropriate, then I show up in this dress, and Owen kind of smirks and says, Jordan, I don't think that really suits you. And they say, why? Is it not my color? So we're already seeing a little bit of tension developing between Owen and Jordan. So the different responses that Owen has to Jordan and to Alexandra have nothing to do with honesty, have nothing to do with disclosing their transition or their trans identity. It really is just transphobia and misogyny. Because if we look at the history of women in religious organizations, especially Christian organizations, we're in the Western Hemisphere here for our country. This history is largely Christian, and a lot of those traditions really subjugate women. And so a lot of those Christian traditions treat women as property of men. So what happens is we get this old, tired stereotype about trans people tricking men. The reason why Owen is so upset is because he could read that Jordan was trans and non-binary from the beginning, and then Jordan said, I am trans and non-binary. Alexandra has passing privilege. And so there's this old, tired stereotype that trans women are trying to trick men, and if he were to see her and think that she were attractive, what does that mean about his sexuality? Does that mean I'm gay? Because for these people, they don't see trans women as women. They see them as men. So if I see her and I think she's attractive, does that make me gay? There's a lot to unpack, and it's all bad. So this is really kind of bringing up the fact that sometimes these religious groups pay more attention to the activities of trans women than of trans and non-binary men, because it's less of a threat to them. So then we get this montage of people doing activities that are very gendered. The girls are making friendship bracelets, and the boys are like doing these military drills. And we're starting to see some alliances form, and we're starting to see people interact in ways that are going to be important later on. They really try to divide up the campers in interesting ways that don't necessarily work out for their plans. So we see Veronica and Kim talking while they make these bracelets, and they tie each other's bracelets on each other's wrists, and they're kind of smiley, and so clearly there's a little budding lady romance happening there. And then the boy campers and Jordan are all off doing these military drills. Now, I should say, sometimes I'll just say boy campers, girl campers, because that's how the camp divides them. And anytime they do a boy activity, Jordan is there. Jordan is trans and non-binary. But sometimes, just for the language, let me live. It's just easier to say with the boys, with the girls. You know what I'm saying. I promise I'm not being mean. And so they're doing these like military drills, and Toby, of course, is struggling. And so at one point, Jordan is actually straddling this climbing wall and helps Toby over the wall. So is building community and is assisting other people. And that pisses Zane off immediately. He makes hard, stank-eye contact with Jordan and is just not happy about it. So there's all kinds of tensions that are starting to build. And Jordan clearly just pisses these camp people off because they are not playing by the rules. They are not doing what they're expected to do. They are doing things that are helpful rather than being individualistic, and they're kind of flaunting the rules a little bit. So it's really interesting to see this start to bubble up so early. So that night, there's a scene where all of the campers are paired up and handcuffed to each other. If you weren't creeped out by this camp before, this is the scene that should raise some alarm bells for you. And so they're paired up and they're handcuffed to each other and blindfolded. They're led out into the woods. And then Owen says, self-reliance is part of self-healing. You have to be able to trust your community, which is ironic because what he's trying to do is actually break down their support for each other. Because what they've done is pair up people that they think have very different perspectives on their queerness and people that don't get along. So Stu, the frat boy, is with theater queen Toby. And then we have Veronica and Kim. And then we have Jordan and Alexandra, because they're the two trans non-binary characters, so they just kind of get shunted off together. And they say, go walk for 10 minutes in different directions, and then you're going to stay out here all night. And they're like, what the fuck? And they're like, yep, do it. Bye. So while they're out in the woods, they're kind of talking and they're building these relationships. And then Jordan and Alexandra see the person in the mask in the dark. Now, before they see the person in the dark, Jordan says, something's not right. Are you fucking kidding me? And this year's Understatement of the Year award goes to Jordan for Something's Not Right. No shit, Sherlock. So Jordan is like, I would understand this more if they were Bible thumping and saying hateful things to us. Like, what is going on here? And then they see the person in the woods with the mask on. And Jordan is like, who are you? And then they disappear. And that's the end of it. They just forget about it, I guess. This is where I mean that, like, the horror on this end isn't necessarily that great. They're trying to tell a certain story, but some of the things don't get followed. Because I would be concerned that somebody in a fucking Halloween mask running around through the woods. I would maybe mention that to people the next day. That would be something that I would maybe mention. Also, they're going to try to use Jordan as a red herring later on. And so they've already told us that Jordan can't be the killer because Jordan sees the killer in the woods. So while they're out in the woods overnight, the staff is ransacking the cabins and going through their belongings, looking to see, when they first came into the camp, they had to leave their phones and their computers and any medications or any narcotics. So they're going through to see if anybody still has any contraband. And Cora finds Jordan's Bible. So Jordan has a Bible where they have drawn pictures. So they've drawn on the pages in like colored pencil and done different like rainbows and things that really kind of are meant to illustrate Jordan's struggle with their identity and really trying to come to terms. So some of them are a bit brighter, some of them are darker. And then there's a Bible verse that is outlined on one of the pages that says something about men shall not put on the garb of a woman or something. There is something in the Bible where they talk about clothing. Of course, one verse out of 1,000 pages, and people have to like act like that's gospel truth, as if Leviticus didn't tell us to fucking eat shrimp. There's that. But so they're finding this, and Cora finds this Bible and realizes that Jordan has had some conflict in their identity development and who they are and how they feel about themselves. And she also finds a picture of a young Jordan in very normative feminine clothing with a bunch of military men. So the next day we see Jordan's therapy session. So Jordan is going into therapy with Cora, and as they are going in, Gabriel is coming out and is clearly upset and is crying. And we've seen some people talking with Cora, but we haven't had any voiceover. It's all been montage with music over it. And so this is the first time we're seeing a therapy session. And Cora really starts to manipulate Jordan and uses that picture with the military men to try to establish a connection of like, oh, I understand who it is. I was in the Navy. My family was in the Navy. I wasn't fucking in the Navy as a kid. My family was in the Navy. We moved around all the time. I didn't feel like I got as much attention from my parents. It was really difficult. It was really a lot. And then it starts to turn. And she says something along the lines of, do you think your parents are disappointed in you? And Jordan says, sometimes. You're not going to be what they want. And you know that you're not going to be what they want. You start to try to turn yourself into something special, don't you? You become they. And then it gets really dark and intense. And she's just like, when really what you are is an ugly, lonely, confused dyke. And then she just stops and she's like, that's our time for today. And it's just fucking creepy. So this whole scene is really disturbing. And anybody who has gone through any sort of conversion therapy, this movie might be triggering as fuck for you. So you should be aware of that. In addition to spoilers, you should be aware that if you have experienced this, there might be some things in this that are really upsetting. Obviously, some of it is a little bit more exaggerated because it is a horror movie and we're trying to paint this as a certain type of horror, but it's also realistic to some of the things that they do in terms of the gendering and the way that they talk to people about their identities. So that's really disturbing. Put a pin in that. Hold on. Just remember that that's there. Set it aside. Let it simmer. We'll be back. In the next scene, we're back in the cabin, and Jordan is crying a little bit, just softly, and laying on their bed, and Alexandra is like, "Are you okay?" And they say, "Do you feel like all this stuff that we do, all of this stuff to prove who we are, all these masks, do you think we're making it up?" And Alexandra is like, "We need these masks. We need these masks to live and survive and be who we are." And she's basically saying this is a mask, but it's a mask that's about the truth, because we just happen to not be born into bodies that fit who we are on the inside. So sometimes we have to build this stuff up. We're not making it up. It's who we are. What else are we going to do? If we're going to survive, we have to be ourselves. So Jordan says, all of my life, I've been different. Not this, not that, just this other thing. I'm tired of fighting. And that's where we see that Cora has really gotten to them. And that's really, to me, the horror of these kind of places, because these kind of places exist. And some of this might be exaggerated, but that's what they do. They try to break down who you are. And the statistics for suicide attempts and successful suicides from people who went through conversion therapy are shocking. And so Alexandra is like, you have to believe in yourself. And she starts reciting the lyrics to Pink's Fucking Perfect. And then she starts singing, and then eventually Jordan chimes in, and Toby chimes in because he's the flamey one, so he chimes in first. And then Veronica joins, and she does the rap part from the song, and then she gets Kim to sing, and eventually even Stu joins in and is singing. So suddenly all these people who had very different perspectives, didn't necessarily align, weren't necessarily getting along, and that Owen and Cora really expected to kind of break each other up, putting somebody who really wants to be changed with someone who's really resistant. They thought that would help with the manipulation and help them get with the program. It actually does the opposite. This scene, is it cringy? Abso-fucking-lutely. Is it awkward and uncomfortable to watch? Yes. But it's also perfect. And that really speaks to me of this queer relationship with pop culture and the way that queer people use pop culture to build and sustain community and identity. Now, one of the ways that this is most obvious is with gay men, and especially white gay men. If you think about the stereotype of every gay man having their diva, like a pop diva, all the way back to Judy Garland, to Barbara Streisand, Marilyn Monroe, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Kesha, all of them, all of these pop divas, and the way that all of these different sort of pop culture things help people build and sustain an identity. And that's why, as cringy and as awkward as the scene is, it's also perfect. Because in that moment where these people are trying to break them down, they don't need some song that's like from an indie artist, that's all like complex and well written. They need something that's fucking on the nose, where Pink is just saying, if you ever feel like you're nothing, you're fucking perfect. And that's the message of the song. It's an empowerment anthem, and it's absolutely perfect. And the director, John Logan, is a white gay man, so it doesn't surprise me that he would use that as a moment for all these kids to bond and to bring together this community. We've got Owen lurking in the shadows and watching, so we know that there's going to be retribution for this. This is not the end. Wouldn't it be nice if the credits just rolled and we knew that all these queer kids were going to be happy and escape from these fucking awful people? That's not going to happen. So now, in the middle of the night, Jordan wakes up and goes to the main cabin. It's not clear if they're just trying to look around and snoop around and find out about the camp, or if they went there for some reason to get food or something. They start looking around, they've got a flashlight, and they're going through the desk, and they find a file in one of the desk drawers of these pictures from the history of the camp of people with bruises, with marks, clear evidence of torture. And while they're looking at the photos, Nurse Molly comes in and catches them and is like, what are you doing? And Jordan says, did you know about this? Did you know? Look at this. This is terrible. And Nurse Molly is like, I didn't really know. Not really. I suspected, but I didn't really know. So earlier, there was a scene where Alexandra broke into Nurse Molly's to get her hormones. She had some estrogen hormones, and she had to surrender them at the beginning, so she went in, and Nurse Molly let her take them. And so Jordan says, you protected Alexandra earlier, you have to protect us all. And then as Jordan is leaving, Nurse Molly says, be careful, watch yourself, because things can get a lot worse, and Owen doesn't like you. And Jordan turns around and says, he doesn't know who he's hunting this time. And this is where it's trying to set up Jordan as maybe like a red herring of maybe Jordan is doing the killing. Except we fucking know that they're not, because we saw Jordan see the killer. But it's not a very good red herring. As another little aside, there's also a ton of weird taxidermy in this room. And I don't know if that, combined with the shower scene with Alexandra, seem to me to be subtle references to Psycho. And I've talked about Psycho in videos before and the history of the slasher film. I'll go ahead and link one of those videos up here if you want to take a look at it to find out a little bit more about why Psycho is important. But I think that that might be an interesting way for them to kind of subtly reference Psycho, because Psycho is really the birth point of the slasher film. And there's a lot of gender stuff in Psycho that people are not happy about, because it can be interpreted in a way that is transphobic or is trying to enforce gender normativity. I, as a queer reader and queer theorist, I sometimes read against that, so I don't necessarily agree that it's inherently transphobic, but I think that there is certainly some troubled gender stuff with Psycho that they could be trying to reference as part of building this out as a new version of a slasher. So the next day, we really ratchet up the gendered activity. So again, we separate the girls and the boys, and the girls are baking pies with Sarah, who at this point is clearly... There's some things going on with Sarah because she's very flirty with Kim, and Sarah is the traditional feminine Barbie kind of woman, and she clearly sees that in Kim and is like hitting on her, and eventually like really makes an overt pass at her, and Veronica is not really trying and doesn't really care, and Sarah is really sort of snarky and mean to her, and there's all this stuff going on. So they're baking pies. The boys go off and are doing target practice. So this is another scene that I've heard a lot of people talk about, and we're going to dive into this a little bit. So in this scene, Owen is going on and on about hunters and how hunting is in our DNA as men and blah, 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 all this kind of shit. And they give everybody guns and they have them shoot at the targets or whatever. Very clearly, Jordan establishes themselves as having marksman experience. And then they make a joke about, I probably should say marksperson. So they're kind of going through and establishing that Jordan knows how to handle a weapon. And in fact, they have a little shootout with Zane, trying to hit the bullseye, and Jordan clearly beats Zane, is faster, more accurate, the whole thing. And Owen steps in and is like, Zane, he beat you fair and square. And Alexandra corrects Owen and says, it's they. Another one of those instances where Jordan gets misgendered. So then we get to the scene that everybody talks about, and we're going to talk about it. There's nothing about the scene itself that is a problem, but let's talk about it. There's this dog. When they first get there and they're introducing the staff, there's this old hound dog called Old Duke. And Owen says, he's an old dog, just be kind, blah, blah, blah. And when they're walking out to where they're going to get the guns, Gabriel is talking to Jordan and says, I've seen a dog walk like that. That dog is sick and is clearly in pain. So sets up that the dog is sick, there's something wrong. And so Owen says, who's my killer? Who's my killer? And he says, Toby, get your gun. And he's like, I want you to shoot Old Duke. And Toby's like, no, I'm not going to shoot that dog. What are you talking about? And so then Owen is like, look, Old Duke has cancer. He's in a lot of pain. You can do a merciful thing, put him out of his misery. And Toby says, no, I'm not going to do it. And then this is where it gets very graphic. But again, it's all words. It's all words. Owen says, if you don't do it, I'm going to have Zane take a sledgehammer. And then Zane appears with a sledgehammer and stands sort of near the dog. Not really near, because also Toby is holding a gun, so they're smarter than that. But says Zane is going to break the dog's leg, and if you don't shoot the dog, he's going to break the other leg. And he is going to torture that dog, and you're going to have to listen to that dog until you shoot it, and the dog is not going to know what's going on, and the dog is not going to be able to run away because it has broken legs. So what are you going to do? He's like, one shot, head or heart, kill the dog. And Toby is losing it. Toby is upset. Toby's crying. And Owen's getting more and more intense, more in his face. Now remember, just words. All we see when we see the dog is just happy hound dog sitting like... The dog doesn't even look in distress. So they got like the happiest fucking looking dog. And so the dog is just sitting there. And then sometimes we cut away and Zane is just standing there with a sledgehammer. And then, like, do it, shoot the dog, blah, and it gets really, really intense. And all of a sudden we hear a shot off camera, and then we turn and we see that Jordan has fired a shot, and then we see the dog. Now let me tell you what they did in the scene. They did not use any prosthetics, no practical effects, nothing. The dog literally just looks like it rolled on its side. Like, there's no blood, there's no effects, there is nothing. Everything that happened off screen, and then they just show the dog laying there. There were people who got so upset by this that I saw people online who are like, how dare you not give people a warning? How dare you include this scene? Blah, 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 blah. Remember that pin that we put up earlier? I did not see that same sort of outrage when Cora was psychologically torturing Jordan. So when Cora is clearly manipulating and abusing an actual queer person and is saying those nasty, hateful, awful things to them, people weren't outraged about that scene. And there's a scene later on that comes up that I also haven't seen outrage over, where one of the campers, Stu, basically there's this whole setup where they find out that he's not really with the program as much as they think. And so they strap him to this machine and do like an amped up horror film version of aversion therapy. Which aversion therapy is this whack job thing where they were like, oh, if we just show people pictures of something they think they like and give them electric shocks, then they'll stop liking it. So they hook him up to this thing that's got a fucking car battery and like hook him up to it. And then they show pictures of, like, women in lingerie and then men in lingerie. And then they, like, shock him. And he's, like, clearly in, like, immense pain. Nobody had that kind of outrage about that. This threat against the dog, where the threat, all the graphic stuff is just words. And then when they did shoot the dog, they didn't use any effects, any prosthetics. It's a movie, so it's fucking fake. The dog didn't really die. People were more upset by that. Now, I'm going to say something controversial yet brave. And I think that if you are more upset by that scene with the dog than you are by actual emotional and physical abuse of queer people, I think you should sit with that for a little bit. I think you should really maybe do some internal exploration to try to figure out what the fuck went wrong with you, where you're more concerned about a fictional dog's welfare than you are about actual queer people being tortured. Because again, this thing with Duke all made up, but these conversion camps are real. And I think that if that bothers you more than the actual torture of queer people, I'm not entirely sure you get to call yourself an ally. I said it, and I meant it. So I'm going to leave the rest of it for you to discover. We've talked about a lot of it. We've kind of spoiled a lot of it. But if you haven't seen it yet, there are a few little surprises. It becomes clear very early that the killer is targeting the staff of the camp, not the kids. The kids are not really in any kind of danger. And it's revealed that the killer is one of the former campers who went through it and was traumatized. And that's why that mask, we talked about it earlier, that it looked like two faces that were kind of broken apart and like stapled back together. And that's really representative of the fact that the killer is somebody who went through this and was broken and is now seeking vengeance. And so that's really kind of what this movie is about. So there's still more to it. You can watch the whole thing if you want to see it. I won't talk about all the rest of the plot points, but an interesting place to take it, because then at the end, there's kind of this moment with the killer and Jordan where Owen is there and the killer was basically struggling with Owen, and Owen was about to kill the killer, and Jordan had been hiding in a closet, and then like finds this pistol, grabs this pistol, and is threatening Owen. That person is like, we can end this. We can end this. Shoot him. Like, kill him. You're strong enough to do this. And Jordan says, I'm strong enough not to. And then the killer ends up taking out Owen. Anyway, don't worry if you were thinking that maybe Owen would get away and not die. Does not happen. And in fact, gets impaled on a rhino horn. So, all that taxidermy in the main lodge might be a reference to Psycho, or it might have just been an excuse to have a big rhino head so that he could get impaled on it. So the only camper that gets killed through the whole thing is Gabriel. And so Gabriel is set up as a plant. And that's how Stu gets caught and gets tortured, is because he hooks up with Gabriel, and then it's determined that that was like a test. And so then Gabriel, because he's complicit, and he says he knows who he is, and he's a predator, and then Stu gets tortured or whatever. And I think that that was really an interesting nod to queer people who, for whatever reason, side with anti-queer and anti-trans politics and politicians and movements for their own personal gain. I'm looking at you, queer Republicans, and I'm judging you. So I thought that was interesting to include, and Gabriel then is the only one of the campers that gets killed. That was something that, as I was going into it, so when I first saw the trailer for They Them, I was very excited, because I was like, this is a queer-themed horror film. How fun that we're finally going to get something that's about queer people. And then all of a sudden I stopped. As we were getting closer, I was like, wait, are we just going to watch a bunch of queer people get murdered? Like, is that what I think is going to be so good? Is that we're just going to watch queer people get killed with an axe over and over again? Oh, that could be a whole different kind of trauma. And then as you're watching, I think it establishes pretty early that the campers are not in danger. It doesn't explicitly state it, but I think it really makes it clear that the killer is after the staff of the camp. And I think that the twist at the end, if you haven't figured it out already, is probably pretty easy to guess. It's really about these queer perspectives, and it centers them, and it doesn't make them the victim. And so we don't have to watch a bunch of queer people be tortured unless they deserve it. And yes, I said deserve it. Because we do have Zane and Sarah, who are the activities and athletics directors. And they are former campers. So they are former queer people. And it is shown in a scene that they're not really that former, if you know what I mean. But they are killed because they are complicit with this thing. So they're saying, if you are a queer person and you side with this, Zane, Sarah, Gabriel, you kind of get what you deserve. So it's really interesting to take that queer perspective. And it really is Jordan and Alexandra and Toby who are the least interested in the program, who are the least interested in being normatively gendered. And they are the ones who are the heroes. They are the ones who come out as the kind of saviors of this story. So I think that that's great. So I think that this is a pretty good example of a film that if you dig around and if you think about it and analyze it, I was an English nerd, so I love to do that. I love analysis and text analysis and all that kind of stuff. If you dig into it, it's got some really interesting social commentary. And I think in some ways, it's a little bit less developed than, say, Black Christmas 2019 or Get Out. Now, Get Out is the only one of those three that really nails the horror part of it. So Get Out is great as a horror, as a thriller, and it's also great in the social commentary. Although the more I watch it, the more I'm on board with the horror. I think it's better than I initially thought. But Black Christmas 2019 and They/Them, they aren't as successful. And I think the reason why is because they are more firmly rooted in the slasher subgenre. Get Out is more of like the paranoia horror. So there are some deaths, there's some violence, but it's much more about something's not right here, and people don't believe me when I say there's something not right. So it's a very Rosemary's Baby, it's a very Stepford Wives, it's that paranoia horror. Karen Kusama's The Invitation, which is amazing. So Get Out, I think, succeeds because it stays in that paranoia. Because that's how queer people and trans people and non-binary people are often treated by society. As if we're paranoid. As if we're imagining all of this prejudice that's all around us all the time. Like, what do you mean? Well, they didn't really mean that. Sure, those crazy religious Nazis sent death threats to the drag brunch that you were going to perform in, me, circa June of this year. But you're just making it up. There's nothing to be worried about. Why are you scared about this? Why is anything upsetting you? Blah, blah, blah. So Get Out stays in the realm of being that paranoia horror. Whereas Black Christmas and They/Them both bring in this slasher element. And the slasher element, although I love slasher movies, and I think that you can read them against the grain to really come up with really interesting interpretations, but slasher films do have this kind of troubled, maybe problematic history of how they view victims and killers. So there's always this idea of, if you sin, you get killed in a slasher. That's why there's the stereotype of the final girl being a virgin, not drinking, not smoking, not having sex, not doing drugs, not being mouthy to her parents, all this kind of stuff. She's the good girl, and so she survives. So when you're trying to tell this story about queer people, but then you've got this history of slasher films saying that people who get killed, that's a judgment. And in They/Them, it kind of does work, right? Because you figure out that the people being stalked are not the campers. So it doesn't put that judgment on them. It puts it on the staff where it belongs. But that's never stated. We don't know that the campers are not going to be targeted. We just can see that this killer seems to have their eye on the camp staff and then kills Balthazar first. And, had killed this woman on the road who nobody knew who she was, but she was like an adult. She wasn't with the kids. It has this weird kind of troubled kind of history, and I think that that's a challenge for Black Christmas too. There's this history of judgment of slasher victims that I think complicates it. But I think if we can read against that, and I think if we can just sort of go with some of the places that the horror missteps or isn't perfect, I think you've got a pretty solid horror film that really does center queer perspectives. Now, if this one doesn't do it for you, or if maybe you're triggered by conversion therapy stuff, or maybe you just can't get past the animal stuff, whatever it is, there is a movie on Shudder, a Shudder exclusive called The Spiral, that does have a gay couple at the center of the narrative, and that one is a really interesting, and it stays much more in the paranoia horror, and that one is really good as well. But They/Them is such a big production. It's got really great people like Kevin Bacon, it's got Carrie Preston, and it's got Anna Chlumsky, who recently came back to acting. She was in that docuseries reenactment, whatever it was, on Netflix about Anna Delvey, and so now she's in this as well. She's Nurse Molly, and it's just got really great people. It's got a lot of young, queer talent, trans and non-binary talent. It's really fantastic. So I think you should check it out. It gets my recommendation. The horror is a little bit not as well developed, but I think that if you set that aside, you'll have a really good time watching it. All right, so that is the video. Let me know down below. Have you seen They/Them? What did you think? Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know down in the comments below. If there are any other horror films you want me to talk about or dissect, or if there's any other queer horror that maybe I haven't heard of, you can let me know all of that. I love horror, I love slashers, and I especially love queer horror. So let me know down below. While you're down there, don't forget that you can give me a thumbs up. And if you're like, I don't know about this is crazy. If you're a cishet white man and you're like, that queer person should shut up, give me a thumbs down, because you know what? It's all engagement. The algorithm isn't a picky bitch, and neither am I. Check my grinder. Maybe that cishet straight man isn't so straight after all. While you're down there, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads. I try to upload at least 1 to 2 videos a week, and sometimes, if you're lucky, you might even get a bonus video. Ooh, spooky. If you'd like to chat, banter, or commiserate between uploads, all of my social media will be linked down in the description box below, including a link to my brand newly relaunched website, The World of Champagne, at janessaj.com. Thank you so much for watching, all my boils and ghouls and my non-binary spooky people. I haven't thought of a good pun for that yet. And I hope you enjoyed this, and until I see you again, bye.